has been preaching the most destructive. And of course, a lot of people think it's the fear of failure. They don't want to be a personal failure. And it drives us to perfectionism. And some of us had parents who were constantly driving us to be, did you get all A's? No, I got a B plus. It's not an A. You know, we have that driving us sometimes. And sometimes we're just paralyzed because we don't feel like we can reach that perfection. But as I kept praying about this fear, I realized that a lot of the fears really do come back to that fear of man. And of course, there are physical fears that we have. Some of us are afraid of heights. We don't care what man thinks about us. I'm afraid I'm going to fall off this building, so I'm not going to stand up to the edge. Or there spiders or snakes, or when I preached on swimming last month, I realized that there were people who were afraid of the water. So, I mean, there are physical fears that we have. But I think that the greatest fear, and the most, if I can use the word again, paralyzing fear, is the fear of man. And a lot of our fears, if we run that trail, what will people think of me, is really that fear of man. The adult generation of men in Israel who came out of Egypt failed to enter the promised land because of fear of man. They were intimidated. The Israelites came to the very edge of the promised land. This is the land of which God said, I give you this land, go take it, I will be with you, I will give you the victory. In preparation for the battle, they sent out 12 spies to check out the enemy. One of the 12, Caleb, was full of faith and confidence in the word of the Lord. It's not lack of faith to go spy out the land. Don't feel like, well, God said that it's yours, just go forward. There's also wisdom involved. And they said, let's go see what we're facing. That's not operating out of fear. That's operating out of wisdom. Numbers 13:30 says, and Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let's go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. Some may say, it's nice to be optimistic, but there were 10 people who were not so optimistic. 10 of those other 12. Caleb was not just being optimistic. He was confident. He was fearless. Oh, does that help? Should you turn up the lights? Does that help see it better? Awesome. Except that I'm in the dark. He said, let's go do it now. We can't wait. Get your battle gear. We'll destroy the enemy at once. One of the other 12, do you remember who he was? Joshua agreed with him. The other 10 had a completely different report. Listen to what the other men said. Numbers 13:31. But the men
Thank you,
that went up
mate.
with him said,
Happy Sunday, mate.
will not be able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. I want to say to this church, not just so that everyone here having ears would hear, I want to speak it as if to declare it in this church. Are we those 12 spies? This is kind of a heavy word, but I want you to take it how it's meant. Are we those 12 spies where 10 of us are thinking, I don't think that church is going to be able to move forward. I don't think that church is ever going to be back in its glory days. I don't think that church is. I think they're stronger than we are. I don't believe God's promises. Or are we going to be the two who say, we can do this? Let's be the two. Let's be the two that say, no, I think we're strong enough. I think we have a plan what their senses told them. Their eyes saw the enemy. Rather than what God's word said about themselves and about the enemy, God had already promised them. How simple could it be? It was God's promise. As a result of choosing to believe their senses rather than God's word, they moved from doubt to fear. Fear of people. That fear spread through the whole tribe. And that can happen. If 2 of us believe and 10 of us are not so sure, that can spread. Numbers 13:32. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land for which we have gone to search it is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. And so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. They believed not the report of the Lord, they believed the report that came because of the fear of man. As soon as the Israelites heard this report from the other 10 spies, they cried like babies. They screamed like a girl. They chose to side with those 10, that majority. Be careful sometimes what the majority is saying. God does not always sit with the majority. Fear is like a cancer, and they saw it happen in their camp. It spreads. Fear of man, it's like any other fear. It starts by considering the circumstances rather than the promises. Can I say that again?
Yes.
It comes when we consider the circumstances rather than the promises. Where do we want to stand? The 10 spies saw giants. Joshua and Caleb saw the covenant. They saw the promise. The same God later delivered David from Goliath. The same God delivered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from a furnace, a fiery furnace. He delivered Daniel. Compared to the size of Caleb's God, those giants looked like grasshoppers to him. What are you holding up as the giant in your life? The 10 spies operated in fear of man. Caleb and Joshua operated in faith in God. It's kind of like, to make this techie, it's kind of like your operating system. You know, if you have an Android, you have a completely different operating system. If you have an iPhone, you have iOS operating system. Fear of man, or living and walking in the fear of God, is like having a different operating system. Your decisions are different. Your actions are different. Your words are different. It's true. But they say that this is the only time in the Bible that a woman is said to be in love with a man. That kind of desire was not talked about because marriages were usually of a different nature. But that she is actually described as having, let's just call it a crush. But it was a major crush. And her passion was like known to everyone. it never says that David loved her. Today, we would probably call her entitled. You know, she's like, Daddy, I want a pony. Daddy, I want to marry David. And Daddy was like, I'll see what I can do. So, David had to pay the bride's price of 100 Philistine foreskins. Yeah. David's power continued to rise. Jonathan, also Saul's child, the son, became David's biggest fan. Then there's a moment, I'm not going to go into all of this, but Michal does something that ingratiates David because she saves him from her father's wrath. And she's convinced he'll be so grateful he'll run back to her. A long time passes, much adventure from David, and Michal is made one of his wives, but without any favor or position from the person that she really wanted it from. Let me read from 2 Samuel 6:6. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. They're carrying the flame of the Holy Spirit. And they stumble, and the person that reaches out to keep it from falling, God strikes dead. David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? 2 Samuel 6:20, jumping a little. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, and they went, this is how they got there, and wrote it so tiny. They went 6 paces, and they stopped. And they had worship. And they slaughtered an animal, whatever it was. And they went 6 more paces. And that's how he returned the ark. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. So that was the greeting that he received. I don't know if any of your wives or husbands, whoever, when let's say you're a wife, it's not gender specific, but you're a wife and your husband comes home from a long day at work. He's delivered 3,050 packages. And I know there's some male people in here. Is that a lot? Is that a lot in a day? Let's say he delivered a lot of packages. It's the day before Christmas Eve. It's December 23rd. And he comes home. And his wife said, did you not bring the milk? I asked you to pick up milk. He says, what's for dinner? Yeah. So this is the greeting that Michal gives to David. After going 6 paces, slaughtering, praying, worshiping, 6 paces, okay? And he gets home. So after this ark situation, where Uzzah was killed, Michal, standing at the window of the palace, saw him behaving in a way that she thought, because she's that jealous, devoted, or I don't even know if devoted is the right word, in love, entitled, little princess. And she's like, I don't appreciate the way he's behaving in front of me. Look at all those women lined up on the sides of the road, and they're just watching him in his underwear.
Just keep safe.
Okay, so let's make that story even crazier. I hope this isn't sacrilegious. Let's say the postman who's delivered all those packages comes home in his underwear. I'm sorry. Erase that. Can we edit the tape? I just had that vision, him coming home in his underwear. So he's dancing, he's worshiping. Ah, we did it. Just 6 paces more. We're here! Woo! It's that applause that we gave after worship today. It's a big moment. And when he gets to her, she's like, I don't like the way you were behaving. Really? Okay. So, David replied that he, not Saul, was king now, and that he would do whatever he wanted. It was more important that the common people love him and that he be kingly, then he be kingly and dignified. So this quarrel is the last we see of Michal. Ominously, the text notes that she remained childless all her life. So it implies there was no love, no happiness until her death. So she clearly was overwhelmed with the fear of man. What will people think of me? That my husband is doing that. We probably all know the song. When the Spirit of the Lord comes upon my heart, I will dance like David danced, right? She was angered that it all stemmed from the fear of man. Let's look at another one. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura. Set it up in a plain because from everywhere you went, you could see that gold statue in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together everyone. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. Then, there are always gossips. There are always people who want to run tell. Nebuchadnezzar, there are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time, you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good! But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. We all know. Maybe we know. They go in. They get thrown in. And then look, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Nebuchadnezzar praises God. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's council were gathered together, and they saw these men on those on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not even on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language that speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. So they went from circumstances to fear, or from confidence to fearlessness. Everyone watching that scenario saw the circumstances, and don't you imagine there were family members around Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saying, just don't do it. Let's just move. That would be so much easier. They're looking at the circumstance, and that takes them to fear. Whereas they stood in confidence and moved to fearlessness. And here is where the rubber meets the road, as they say. What is more important to you? What other people think of you, or what God thinks of you? But I have something even more important, a different way to think about this. And this ties in with evangelism and discipleship and just being nice to people. Are you thinking, if I do this, what will people think of me? Or, listen, if I do this, what will people think of God? Do you see how that's so much more important than, if I do this, what will people think of me? Or, what will people think of God? That's even more important. Because for many people, you are the only God they see. And I'm not getting new agey saying, oh, we are God, we are little. I'm not saying any of that. We're called Christians because we're little Christs. They should be seeing the God in you. When you are not performing in order to gain their approval, but you are, let's call it performing, because it reflects who He is. You see the difference? We all want to be liked. That's a given. That's human nature. We're not asking you to go against human nature. What will people think of God because of who I am? I have top 10s. I want you to consider these things. Number 10, you are never alone. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You are never alone. I had a youth pastor at a previous church, and he was sitting around a table, and all the search committee was sitting around him, and I thought, I have to remember this because it's the best comeback I've ever heard. And they said, what would you do differently? At the end of the interview, he said, what would you do differently if Jesus was sitting here with you? And he said, Jesus is always sitting here with me. And I'm like, oh man, that's a good answer. You are never alone. Number 9, you will stand alone before God, but your accusers will not be standing with you. sometimes, and it talks a lot about, if you look up the phrase, accuser of the brethren, sometimes it's people, sometimes it's the enemy. But when you stand before God, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant, there are not people around you saying, oh, but did you see that timesheet? We just stand before God. You don't have to ask, what will God think of me? He has known you since your inception. He has known you. Number 8 is love is unchanging. There is nothing we can do to make God love us more. And there's nothing we can do, this is probably harder for most, to make God love us less. There is nothing we can do. Do you believe even the bad things you've done can make God love you? He sees what you're going through. He sees even the bad things. We are all sinners. We all make mistakes. And we all sometimes make mistakes with intention. Like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that, but I meant to do it. Now that I think about it, I shouldn't have done that. But God sees the lesson that is happening in your life. He sees your walk. If you let him, he will direct your walk. His love is unchanging. Number 7. I love this idea, and it works in so many ways. Get to the grub of the issue, yours or theirs. When you are facing that fear of man, it's like, oh, I don't know what people are going to think of me, or I'm embarrassed, or whatever. What am I really afraid of? And you address that issue. When I say get to the grub of the issue, this is a slide I think that goes like one to another. So, a person having a problem in their lawn, and they think, oh, it's raccoons. They're out there digging up my lawn. So I need to get rid of the raccoons. And so they're going to call I don't know who you call a trapper. You call in someone to get rid of all the raccoons in your yard. But you have to get to the grub. Because what is happening in this little raccoon story, do you know what a grub is? Have you ever dug up the dirt and you find those little things? They'll eat the roots of plants. They're little white. Yes, there's a picture of it. They're disgusting. But that's a grub. They are underground, and rodents and raccoons and all kinds of things. If you have groundhogs, they'll do it too. They love those. Those are like, that's like a little cupcake. And they'll dig up your yard. Or moles. You know what moles are? Like, you'll see like runners. They're under the ground, so there'll be a little, you can see that it's like a little tube going along. They're hunting for grubs. In any conflict situation, or in any fearful situation, find what the grub is. Why? Why am I so upset about this? Because it's going to make me look bad? Or in general, how many of you like to lose? None of us like to lose. Find out what is the grub of the issue. Why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid that people don't think like you think? What are you so afraid is going to happen? And here's what could happen. And I am a fairly reactive person. Let me use that term. When I have a disagreement, I am not shy. I speak up. even in spite of my stage fright. Yeah, I'll speak up when I'm having a disagreement. But to what end? I really need to catch myself when I'm in that place and say, all the way back to what I said in the beginning. Do I care about what people think of me, or do I care about what people think of God? Because I'm wearing a big nameplate, hopefully wherever I go, that says, I believe in Christ, who was crucified for me so that I can have an abundant life. I wear all of that as a badge of honor. He's worthy. I am blessed that He accepts me and loves me and saves me. How am I making Him look? In any conflict, get to the grub of the situation. What is the worst thing that can happen here? You know the worst thing that can happen? This is heavy. What is the worst thing that can happen? You would change people's idea of who God is